We often say that my next guest needs no introduction. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I think this is a truism. I am in conversation with Viswanathan Anand, the five-time world chess champion. He clearly needs no introduction to anybody in the group. He's been a role model for many. And I can also say that this is the first time in my life that I am doing a discussion where I have earned the respect not only of my peers, but of my kids and their peers. So that is the kind of longevity. He is a world chess champion who's had 20 years at the top. And we'll ease into this conversation. And Vishy, one of the strongest influences in your life, I think, early in your book, has been your mother. And there's a very interesting story that you share of you and your mother solving chess puzzles or chess puzzle competitions together in Manila and what that led to. And I just think that that's a nice story to kind of share as a start to this conversation, and then we can build up on it.
Yes. So I was very, very lucky that my mother knew how to play chess. Uh, my mother came from a chess playing family where my grandfather and my uncles all dabbled in chess, and my mother knew how to play the game as well. I say that I was very lucky because in the 70s, um, the biggest hurdle to getting to be a chess player was finding someone who knew the rules of the game. Once you did that, everything went faster. So I was lucky to have that person in the family. In fact, most of the world champions until then had learnt it from a father or a grandfather, a few from their mother. So my mother taught me how to play when I was about 6 years old. Then I joined a chess club for about a year. And then my father got an interesting assignment to help the Philippine Railways on an Asian Bank project. So we moved to the Philippines for a couple of years. And I was already into the game. And in the Philippines, they had a TV program. Chess was very popular then over there. And they used to have a 1 hour television program. It was in the afternoon, so I think between 1 and 2 in the afternoon when I was at school, about chess. Maybe they assumed that kids wouldn't be interested, and so they put it at that time. And because I would miss the content, my mother would write down everything they showed. So they would show a game, analyze it in some depth, say it was played recently, and these are the things that happened. My mother would write all that down, and then at the end of the show, they would give a puzzle that you could solve and send them the answer. So when I got back from school after I'd done my homework, my mother would play through the game with me, what happened that day in the show, and then we would solve the puzzle and send our answer in. Eventually, I solved so many of these puzzles that they would take you to their library where you could pick up a free chess book if you had solved the puzzle. That was your reward. And so they took me to the library and said, help yourself to all the puzzles you want. I mean, all the books you want, but please don't send the answer to any more puzzles.
So you were actually banned from the puzzle, and this was at the age of how
I
old?
was 9 then.
So at the age of 9, you
I
were
was
banned
9.
for solving chess puzzles because you solved every puzzle that they gave, and just fantastic. So just taking that a little forward, grandmaster at 19, right? Fifth in the world when I finished my BCom is a line I took from your book. So how do you stay grounded when you have so much early success?
I think a lot of it goes to how your family, your friends all react to you. And being the youngest in my family, I don't think they could ever fully start treating me like a star or something. They, I was always the baby of the family, and that's the thing. But of course, they were very proud of me. And same with my school friends. I mean, for all of us, nothing has changed. We're all still 13 or 14 running around school. So um I think I found that very helpful in not changing who I am. And of course, this was reinforced by the fact that as time went on, I realized it makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons to um, try to stay grounded. It's just common sense, I think.
So, I just have one more anecdote on this whole thing of grounded. There is a story in the book that you talk about of a gentleman in a train in Kerala. Yeah, and you must share this story because I think it just says so much about you.
Yes, so this is a very nice story because it also tells you something about how famous I was in a certain sense back. I was traveling in a train. In fact, I was going to a felicitation function. They were going to felicitate me for having become India's first grandmaster. And I had considerable news coverage, both of my World Junior Championship and my grandmaster title. And I was no longer surprised to be recognized and to be well known. But as you can imagine, it was uneven. Some places it happens more often, some places less. Anyway, we're on this train, and nice old man, he asks me, young man, what do you do? I told him, well, I'm a chess player. And then he says, okay, but what do you do? So I told him, well, I'm thinking of taking up chess as a career, and I'm really, I think, I might give it a go. He tried a few things. Do you have a job lined up, or can you still go back to university, this kind of thing. And by the way, I was still doing my BCom at that
Mm,
point.
mm.
I said, well, I'm studying, but I really want to be a chess player. And I knew what was going through his head, but still I was also in an awkward position because I couldn't really, I didn't want to volunteer anything. So then he said, young man, I hope you don't mind. I'll give you some advice. Sports is a very unpredictable career in India. And if I were you, I would think about it twice. He said, if you were Viswanathan Anand, you could probably make a living out of chess, but otherwise it's very risky.
And, and
And I
did
still think
did
it's one of the
did you tell him after
nicest things
that?
that has
Did
happened
you
to me.
did you tell him after that?
In case you're wondering, of course, I didn't tell him.
You
I didn't
didn't
tell
tell
him
him,
after.
right? So I
I
was
did not.
just that was what I found remarkable about the story, that you didn't tell him. You had the humility, and yet in that moment of not being recognized, he paid you the ultimate compliment, right? That you were the symbol
Right.
of what it was to be successful as an Indian chess player. Fantastic. One of the themes that is right through your book and through every conversation I've had with you is the importance of learning and reflection. And one of the things, again, I suspect that your mother had a role, is that you say that after every game, whether you lose or win, you've developed this habit of putting things down. So, if you could talk a little bit about how you reflect in success and in failure, I think people would find that very useful and interesting.
Okay, so like all people in all walks of life, chess players will have narratives. They'll have stories of what happened to them and so on. And in most cases, your story is what you want to remember it to be. But in chess, we have a convention. This was much stronger in the old days when uh, before computers, because the person across you was the only other person who had sat for 4 or 5 hours playing that game with you. And so there was a convention that you analyze the game with your opponent after it finished.
Mm.
This is healthy because, first of all, it teaches you to, despite your frustration and everything, it teaches you to sort of get a grip on yourself and try to learn what happened. But the more important thing is you try to learn what happened in that game, for good or bad. I mean, the good moves you made and the bad ones you made. When it's still fresh, what you actually did. Because by the time you go back home, you think, this is what must have happened to me, because that's what, though the memory is fresh, you're already generating explanations. By the next morning, you remember what you want to remember. And a week later, there are almost no lessons really worth learning, because you have invented a story of how it went. So this convention is very healthy, and it used to be the norm. Of course, nowadays people just go back and check with the computer. But um, to extend that, my mother would say it's not enough for you to analyze with your opponent after the game. When you come back, I'm going to give you a diary. I want you to sit and write down what are the things that happened to you. And this was very, very useful because it addressed that second point. Um, I'll give you a concrete example. In the game, I could have analyzed two moves on, let's say, move 22. Um, I saw that one of them was good, but I saw that the other one was also good. I hesitated between them, and I finally played the one that was slightly inferior. Now, and it could be all sorts of things. I would know exactly how I might not have spent 5 minutes on each move. I might have spent 1 minute and just decided I don't like it. Then I would go to the other one, go back, then come back, then go back. It's a disorganized way of thinking, but it's how real thinking is on the chessboard. We can romanticize about how you approach a problem, you break it down and all that, but that's not real life. So that is the crucial element. You'll find that even during the game, once you realize you've made the wrong decision, you'll start to remember that you made the wrong decision because there was a pretty variation or something like that. But this is your head trying to contain your own embarrassment. You know you've done something wrong and think. So unless you, when you get back home, you immediately write it down. The next time you're likely to make the same mistake unless you have seen it. And then you're likely to make the same mistake again unless you have thought it through. Because this is about your psychology, it's about your emotions, it's not about your chess, because you saw the good move as well. But we all have our preferences, they are based on our history. I might have had one painful experience in a similar kind of position, I might have had a bad memory, I might not like my opponent's face, I might not like an opponent with a similar face to someone's face I don't like, any number of things. So my mother said, when you come back, I want you to write down what happened in the game. So you write down your impressions right after the game. Back then, it was very honest. I did this, I thought of this move, I didn't do this thing. Already, maybe some embellishment has happened, but anyway. And so I think my mother was hinting at that aspect, that it's important to have this record because afterwards you only remember what you want to remember. And I think after one game, I was so hopping mad. And my mother said, anyway, write it down. And I was so annoyed at her that I wrote down, I'm an idiot, I'm an idiot, I'm an idiot, which wasn't really the point of the exercise. But anyway, it was good advice. And it turned out to be wonderful because many, many years later, I looked at these diaries. And I wouldn't say I derived a technical benefit or a chess benefit, but it was beautiful for me to remember exactly what I thought of at various moments in my career. It makes it more alive rather than, again, remembering the story that I wish I would have actually undergone. I had it very honestly, and this was nice. And there were so many things from my childhood I'd completely forgotten as well. So very, very good advice from my mother. I'm very grateful to her.
And you put it into practice, right? So there are 3-4 big takeaways for the audience. One is reflect while it is fresh. If you don't reflect on your failures or your mistakes, you will repeat them. And I think that can be extended to multiple settings. I'm going to build on this a little bit and talk about, just the theme of learning and experimentation, which I see across everything that you say. There is this wonderful moment in the book, and you mention it early in the book also, and then come back to it, where you say you were playing Kramnik. And Kramnik liked pawn to queen 4 as the comfortable opening for him. And pawn to king 4 was your comfortable opening. But when you had to open against Kramnik, you opened with PQ4 because you said that is not what he would expect you to do. And there is this line. And it says, the primary allure for me was to approach the match with a measure of excitement and the thrill of having to take a risk. I found it massively liberating. Now, what is interesting is that this line is in the middle of a world championship match. You're doing this experimentation. So can you just take us through the mindset of what an appropriate level of risk is in these situations and how you thought about it?
Okay, so in chess, you often have this choice between playing the move you know to be best and what you have been trained to do. But every once in a while, a move will occur to you, which simply looks good, but you cannot you're not as familiar with the details. Um, with Kramnik, I had one big problem, which is that in my favorite opening, the one that I played all my life, which is pawn to king 4 or e4, um, he's able to shut down the play. By the play, I mean the dynamism in the position. He's able to convert it and drag it down into much more turgid channels. And I don't get the free flow of pieces that I normally look for. And this was a big problem because in the tournament in Mexico, I had not been able to put any pressure on him with the white pieces. And for a while, I had not put any pressure on him with the white pieces. When we played at that time, I think he had won 9 games against me, all with the white pieces. I had won 3 games with the white pieces and 4 games with the black pieces. So I was trailing him by 2 points, but I was the only one who'd ever won with the black pieces, because with white, I was not able to puncture, find a weak spot to aim at. So that evening, I was thinking of the match, and as you can imagine, I was thinking, oh God, no, to spend a whole year banging my head against this wall, which is literally how it felt. And then suddenly the idea occurred to me, why not just play d4? And the more I thought about it, I started to like it. It addressed one or two important problems. One was the one I already mentioned, which is that I have a better chance of it taking me to positions which I wanted to play against Kramnik. I mean, your approach has to be opponent specific. That I wanted to play against Kramnik. And second, I'd been having considerable difficulties with the memory. Now, this is not your memory cells failing. This is simply a certain amount of boredom. The thing you've been doing all your life, if you keep on doing it, at some point, it's not enough to revise something for 10 minutes because you forget it again. Your head is in some way bored. It's not inspired. And this had been happening to me again and again, which I would forget some detail at the board because you're not that enthusiastic. So my idea was, let me switch to e4. Now, it wasn't just a wonderful idea. There were also big risks involved. The biggest risk was I would find, yes, I'd play d4, we'd get to a nice position, then suddenly I'd be out of my depth because I've not played that kind of position all my life. So I'll be new to it. And the second thing is the opposite effect for my opponent. But here the risk was that what seemed like a safe, sensible option, in effect, you could take this to any decision. You could say, I could have become a doctor instead of a sportsperson, because that would have been the sensible, well-charted path to follow. But maybe you'll be bored. Maybe it won't excite you that much. No offense to doctors, but that's just a relative thing. So I thought about this and I started to get excited by the idea because I was actually looking forward to, and I thought, great, then I'll take this decision. I'll play d4 in this match. And the other advantage you would have is that the whole time I would be very conscious that I could be out of my depth. So naturally, my concentration during the game will be higher. I would spend less moments on autopilot because there is no autopilot for me on d4. So there were all sorts of good things. The big danger was that I would be out of my depth. But I thought, well, I have a year to train, and if I, focus on this and nothing else for 6 months of training, I managed the risk a bit, and I've gotten that excitement. So that was the kind of approach I took, and it worked brilliantly. It's the best match I've ever played, and now you can ask, why don't you do that every time and so on? And there are details. There's always details, and it's never that simple. And once your opponents expect it and so on. But I'm really happy I did it at one time because it paid off big time.
No, it's a great example of breaking your comfort zone, but doing it in a calculated way. Like in the book also, you talk about this distinction, and I think it's useful. What's the distinction between taking a risk and gambling? And you've spoken about this, right?
Very much. I was going to play d4, but it's not. I didn't wake up in the morning and say I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. Instead, I decided decide what I'm going to do, and then I spend time thinking about things that can go wrong. And everything that can go wrong that you address is one thing less you have to worry about. And it's more methodical. And then you balance the odds. You have a chance, the advantage of surprise, but at the same time, you're clear in your head.
So it's a great example of a strategic.
I mean, gambling is literally throwing the dice and saying, I'll accept whatever result happens. And that's not what I did at all.
No. It's a calculated risk, it's a strategic risk, but because you had planned for it, you were actually enjoying it, right? So it was exciting. It is like saying, I take on an assignment. I have 70% of the capability. There's 30% that is uncertain. I prep for it, but I know I'm going to learn and enjoy the process. And that seemed to be very much part of the language that you had going into this. One of the things that you have talked about, even in the build up to this event, is the impact and disruption that computers have caused in chess. Now, I'm from a generation that, we talked about Deep Blue versus Kasparov and we were wondering who would win. But today, probably it has reached the point where it is no longer a matter of debate. The computer wins every time. So, related question, could you trace the journey of computers in chess and what the introduction of artificial intelligence and AI engines has done to that journey?
Okay, from a historical perspective, this is all very strange because I would do anything to play against Deep Blue now. With my understanding, I might even stand a chance against that machine.
Okay.
But it was seen as closing the debate on whether humans could ever play computers. It was the breakthrough event. And then once the principle had been established, they got more and more efficient at it. With every new generation of processors, slightly better software would come. And by 2000, my PC could beat a human being fairly consistently. Then every year that gap widens. Essentially, it's a bit like a car. You can start off with a slow car and then you keep getting a new car every 5 years. The human is never going to catch up because the slow car was too much for him already. So that happens. But the reason I say that's strange is because once upon a time I trusted the word, because once you cannot play against something, you start using it as a training tool and a tool to understand the game better. And once upon a time, I trusted a computer in, let's say, 2002 and 2003 as much as I trust a computer today. But from today's perspective, I can only smile at the work I did with those computers. So what I once believed to be the absolute truth that I could depend on now seems to me like a joke, and I can even see why. That's the kind of evolutions happened. So in 2006, there was a breakthrough with, they produced quite an intelligent program. Not intelligent in the way AI is, but intelligent in the way that it cut down the number of lines it had to look at. It selected its first move very, very quickly through a very efficient search, and then it advanced further. So that was a big jump. And then 1 or 2 years later, another new program, which would try some new method, came, and that was again a big jump. And I would say about 7 or 8 years ago, the best computers were 400 points stronger than any human being on Earth, the best human being. So, which is a huge gap. They're expected to win almost every game. And then unexpectedly, just when you think chess development has run its course and we'll now see more of what we've already had, but nothing interesting or spectacular, suddenly they found that these neural networks could be taught to play a game, eliminating human bias, eliminating any bias of sorts, because the old programs had grandmasters codify simple rules for them, and these simple rules would be put into the playing program, which would then implement it, and then combine that with the fact that it sees so much. Its vision is very powerful. It will see 200 million positions, 500 million positions. But it's based on these rules that we gave it, which is that the bishop is 3.15 and a knight is 3 and whatever, and that this square is worth so much and that square is worth less and so on. And it would do that. But what AI did was that they gave a computer, a neural network, the rules of chess, nothing more. not a single value, not a single hint, nothing. They gave the network the rules of chess and told it to play. I think in the end, it played 44 million games against itself. And essentially, by trial and error, it became so good that it crushed the previous generation of computers totally. It just wiped it. I think the score was 100-0. Again, definitions get tricky because the previous generation was slightly neural network and this was a bit more and so on. But it's amazing that all the human knowledge of the last 500 years, they were saying essentially is worthless. It's bias. They're not saying it doesn't have useful nuggets in it, but they're saying a human being does not know how to explain it to another entity in a way that it can understand, and that entity can figure it out by itself, which is what happens with picture recognition and any number of other things that they try it with. If it generates its own data and it eliminates some of our rules of thumb, it comes up with new conclusions that seem revolutionary to us. That's kind of where we are now. And it's surprising that at every stage, they're able to do something very, very new and keep this revolution going. It's not about beating humans because they've been beating humans for the last 20 years. It's about now that they're beating each other still. You think at some point the development would stop, and it hasn't. And that's been quite fascinating.
So there are two logical questions, right, that come out of this. So as a player who's been known for flashes of brilliance, and a lot of what you talk about combines logic, preparation with intuition. So what is the role of intuition now in chess?
Well, intuition is a human thing. It is not a computer thing. So when the first two people played a chess game with each other, and then they told their friends, and those friends said, "Hey, but why can't you do this instead?" We have essentially been doing what that network did in 44 million games. It did it purely with itself, and we did it in a human way. Then we wrote a book about it, and then we sent the book out. Then some person in faraway lands had an intelligent observation to make. That's how human knowledge accumulated. Based on all that knowledge, we have a good idea of how to make guesses. I mean, our neural network has nothing to apologize for with that one. We'll beat it handy in anything, in many things. But in specific tasks, especially tasks where all the information is on the table, they outperform us by a lot.
So,
And it turns out that the rules of thumb that we have, they're very humany. I can tell them to someone else, and because of language, that other person will understand what I'm saying. But if you take that sentence and you try to think it's vague, it's got guesswork, it's got thing. Everybody can interpret it in their own way. It's not something you can feed to a computer, and that was, I think, the useful insight that there's a way of approaching this problem which completely bypasses that. And then the ironic thing is that the latest way of playing for a computer resembles the human way of playing quite closely. So a lot of our guesses have been very good. In a funny way, finally we got a neural network which paid us the ultimate compliment. The previous generations were not telling us we were good; they were telling us we were quite bad. But this one finally pointed out that we are much better than we thought.
so it's
But
like
we don't have the ability to explain it to that level.
right. So it's really fascinating because my follow-up question. There are a lot of business leaders and business school students listening to this, and if I were to say that in any structured environment where all the choices can be enumerated, what this tells us is that the computer will overtake the human being. So if I were to ask you to think beyond chess, what are the other contexts where you see this happening?
Actually, neural networks are getting good even in areas outside of. So chess is very well defined. There are very, very specific rules, and all the information is whatever I see at the board is what my opponent sees. They don't have any special information. Unlike poker and bridge, where my hand is my hand and your hand is your hand, here it's all at the table. And This, by the way, is also the reason that children are incredibly good at chess. This is why chess has always had a tradition of young prodigies, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, performing unbelievable things, because um, the strict rule-based thing appeals to them,
Hmm.
and it reduces unpredictability on the edges.
Hmm.
Um, and it turns out in these sort of things, computers are good. They're just much better than us because, um, well, we used to think they were much better than us because they performed at a consistent level, and our level went all over the place. So eventually, we'd make a mistake, they'd punish us. But it now turns out that even learning, they continually come up with good insights. But there is still a lot of value in humans taking a look at that and coming up with new, more refined rules. So I'll put it this way: if I can take something a neural network does and make it in a higher principle, and typically this will involve the use of language, which is probably the greatest thing humans do, right? Language. And I say, in all positions where the queens are apart by so many squares and the pawns are like this and thing, this is possible. That kind of principle only we have the ability to do right now. They are good in narrow things, but we can, our key contribution should be that we then take a lot of the nuggets that they have identified and try to find some bigger principle or some bigger organizing principle. And if we can grasp that, then it's a huge strength.
So kind of interesting, right? You're saying we can't do better than the computer, but we can make the computer better than itself, right? I mean, if we give better and more refined rules, we can make the computer better. So I'm just going to Vishy, just jump in and look at the audience for maybe one or two questions, and then we will come back. We are at 44, so we have roughly 10 minutes to go. Um,
Mhm.
okay, so I think there was a question on what has been your experience of coaching the new generation of young chess players. Particularly when you say the computer plays a larger role. There was also a question from Ajit Rangnekar who said, "Can a computer replace a coach, or is there still a?" So, your experience on coaching and the role of a human coach when the computer exists.
Right. So one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that a project which has been on my mind for a while. I met someone at Westbridge Capital, and they offered to support the initiative. And so what I'm doing is I'm picking a few of the best juniors in India. The profile, all of them, is they became a grandmaster roughly at the age of 14 to 15, and they're all could have been the youngest grandmaster in the world. That thing. And trying to overcome this gap that we have, which is that we are one of the top chess playing nations on earth, except at the very top. So in the top 20, we're underrepresented. But everywhere else and every other metric, we are doing very well. So I had the idea, well, let me. By the way, it was also inspired by what Finnick once did in the Soviet Union and so on. So my idea was I will support these juniors. Clearly, because of Westbridge, I'm not charging them and that kind of sort of thing. And I see my task as adding to the computer. They are already almost as good as me, if not better, at using the computer and things. I mean, they're just the computer generation. For them, it's natural. Um, Even finding interesting ideas and new concepts, they do effortlessly. What I felt was the key thing I can add is to tell them the kind of situations and challenges they'll face and explain that in words based on my own experience, and tell them, well, one day you will face the situation when the stakes are high enough, and you will do things that you did not think yourself capable of, and I mean that in a bad way. You will make blunders, you'll do things you don't recognize, and you'll think, well, how is it possible that I'm playing this badly? That's the situation, pressure and high stakes and tension. That's what it does to you. And these are the methods I try to use to cope You'll have to find your own, but maybe I'm giving you a starting point. That's really what I'm trying to bring. So we all use computers together, but my thing is if we discover something, do we understand it back and forth? Do you understand why something is good? The computer is giving the answers fast, but now everything in chess is about asking the right questions. The only value is, in fact, because anybody who starts a game is using an app on his phone, which is as good as the best uh, software almost. What is the value in asking the right questions? And so to interact with them, make them comfortable in the situation, understand the challenges they'll face. And these are very human things. So only one human can tell another. This sort of thing the computer can never do. It'll give you the answer brutally. And I think that is the one more question which turned up. What happens where do we need can a computer be a coach? No, it can't. It can give you the answer. It can give you multiple answers. And then you have to bring the human element to it and try to understand what's going on.
So it's kind of great, right? So one is the computer can give you answers, but the coach helps you ask the right questions. The coach helps you find the answer. And you're also talking about the emotional and psychological aspect. I'll take one last audience question because we have now 7 minutes. And then we will talk a little bit about your switch to commentary and then kind of close this. So, a student asked, we've heard a lot about how Vishy reflects. How does he relax and how does he rejuvenate? So, we were talking about learning. How, when you're obsessively focused on an outcome, do you have another life, and how important is keeping that other life kind of active and providing you with balance, if you want to say?
That's a very, very relevant question because quite often and multiple times in my career, I've hit this wall. Each time it happens very often that you fall in and out of love with chess. But there are times when the short-term fixes no longer work and you feel you've hit a wall in terms of your ability to go on. And then you need to get away from the game for a while. It can be a week, it can be a month. In some cases, it was even 2 or 3 months. Um, and then you can come back to the game and you'll find that the hunger has come back. But in the meantime, it's much healthier if instead of sitting around staring at the ceiling, you actually have other passions, hobbies, relationships, which can. It's much easier to enjoy a day where your mind is engaged in different ways rather than. So that's what the other side comes on. So for me, it's the ability to take a nice long walk. It's the ability to discuss other subjects. It's the ability to read up on something else, to catch up with school friends, to catch up with chess friends, to go out, travel. All these things allow you to change the subject. So you recover emotionally much faster. And then I can come back to chess. And when the hunger is back, then it's much easier.
So that's great advice, right? So you have very conscious passions that you pursue. So, I just want to take this further when you look at reflection, rejuvenation, you're talking about all of this. Now, you have recently taken on commentary and you've been, by all accounts, very successful and very popular. How did you approach a new challenge, right? Commentary was a new challenge for you. So, how did you approach it? How do you think about it?
Okay, so I've done some commentary online. And then FIDE asked me if I wanted to do commentary for the World Championship. I thought about it for a second and I decided it would be a lot of fun. My point of view wasn't even based on being a commentator, I'll tell you. I thought the first time I'll go and experience a World Championship without the tension of playing. For the first time I'll sit there and actually be relaxed the whole day instead of constantly, by chewing my nails and thinking, what am I going to play tomorrow? So that was my motivation. But I found commentary very interesting. One of the things that has happened recently is that chess has exploded on the internet. And so one of the skills we will need is that not only how do you play chess well, but how do you communicate that? And how do you communicate your thoughts? How do you bring it to life for another person? I mean, essentially, we are taking away the mystery of chess a little bit, trying to make it more accessible to people. And how do you do that? So I think these things do help you grow. I mean, I did commentary, and afterwards, I think when I start working on chess again, I bring some fresh perspective, maybe even the perspective of a spectator or thing, and then it helps me understand the reactions of people while a tournament is going on. Uh, because all these things kind of have a knock-on effect on you. When you're playing, you are vulnerable to what other people are thinking, what questions you're asked in the press conference, and this sort of thing. And so being able to see it from another side was very nice. But simply for my commentary, I did my best to imagine what my audience would look like. And I thought I should, the only thing interesting in chess to communicate to them is what it feels like to sit there and solve it on your own. And so I focused on that. I never used a computer during the commentary. I would always sit there and think, if I was sitting at the board, what would I be able to see? And I would keep on talking that so that they got some sense of that. Because if they made the mistake of switching on the computer and they got the answer immediately, then after that, they didn't understand why these two guys who are supposedly the best players in the world are sitting there for half an hour staring at it. You've lost that ability.
So, that's a remarkable thing, because what you're basically saying is, look, I'm one of the best chess players in the world. But when I sit down to commentary, I'm thinking, who's my audience? We spend so many times saying, who's my customer? But here is Viswanathan Anand starting as a commentator, and he says, who's my customer? And he's able to kind of really think of it from the point of view of the customer. We have now 2 minutes, so I'm just going to end with two or three things. One of the things that I found very, very interesting is your belief in learning and experimentation. And here is a line for the audience from his book: nothing you do, however unconnected it is to your livelihood or your life, ever goes waste. And that's the theme that you see multiple times, even in this conversation. I would want you to share just this story of Vladimir Putin when he met you, and the Mikhail Tal Academy. I think the audience will love to hear that, and we will end with one small fact. But the Putin story, I'm
Yes,
sure, is
that was a very nice story indeed. So what happened was I played the World Championship match against Boris Gelfand in Moscow. So the venue was Moscow, and it was a very tough match. I won the tie break, and then the next day, President Putin invited Gelfand and me to his presidential cottage, the one outside the city, and we went there for a meeting. And once the meeting started, he asked Gelfand, because Gelfand obviously someone who grew up in the Soviet Union, so they spoke in Russian. And then he asked me, "So how did you come to chess and all that?" And I said, "Well, I learned it at the Soviet Cultural Center in Madras, because that's where I used to go, and there used to be a club. And by the way, your country provided excellent chess sets and clocks, so that's where I grew up." And I thought this was a nice thing to drop in. And then he said, "Oh, so we brought you on ourselves." And I thought that was very quick-witted of him. But yeah, it was a very nice compliment. I could not come up with a very quick retort, but I enjoyed it.
and just what is remarkable in that context is you started with the Mikhail Tal Academy. You're like the Kapil Dev for India, because I understood in our conversation later that in terms of people born beyond 1992, India has created as many grandmasters as Russia. The difference is only one grandmaster. We've created something like 74 grandmasters in India. The figure for Russia is 75. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah. So let me, Vishwanathan
yes. So
Anand.
grandmasters, what, under the age of 30,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's remarkable,
and we
right?
are just one behind the Russians.
And that started with you, and
It is very nice.
it must be it's something to be really proud of for you, and you're not stopping there. You're helping us build top 10 players, and that's your latest mission. We wish you every success. It's been an absolute privilege. But let me just close this by saying, it's been there on the chat, so the chat has stolen a little bit of the thunder of this. But 4538 Vishy Anand is a planetary body. So it's been an absolute privilege to talk to the only Indian sports person who actually has a planet named after him. Lot of learnings on how you learn, an attitude to humility, how you stay on top, the importance of reason and emotion, the role of technology. It's been an absolute masterclass and an absolute privilege. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks so much. Pleasure.
So we can go on. I think we can move on to the next. Yes, Avantika.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think we have the visual ready. Is that right, Vinayak and team? Can we have that up? And then, my God, I had a smile pretty much throughout this session. It was fantastic. But let's go to the visual first, and then Kavi and I can try and close the session.
So it had all the ingredients of reflection, humility, courage, um, the fine art of journaling. And sometimes when I journal, I look at things as though it's a waste of time, and I will do it with far more emphasis. What else did strike your thought as something that you're going to do something very differently, Avantika, from what you heard from Vishy Anand?
Yeah, no, I just felt, I'm generally a very methodical, very structured person, but I loved how he said, approach the math with a level of exhilaration of taking risk. And I'm very far from taking risk. I'm just not that person. But now I'm almost thinking, yeah, it gives me the courage to think, uh, be methodical, be structured, approach the math, but there is nothing that should stop you from taking risk, of course, as long as you've thought about what all can go wrong in taking that risk. But I thought it gave me goosebumps just listening him talk about his own experience and how his life has kind of progressed and moved on. It was fantastic.
Yes, indeed. And all the stories about various dimensions in his life remind us that extraordinary is couched in ordinary moments.
Mm.
And if we take care of those ordinary moments, I think all of us have the chance and the choice to do extraordinary stuff. So thank you very much for joining us for today. As you would know, this is day 2 of the 4 days. But please remember, 4 days when we're coming together, but please remember this is a month long festival. And in the air meet booth, there is something very interesting which is coming up, which is Roger Martin, who is one of the world's leading experts in areas like design thinking, is going to be in conversation with Jeffrey Garrett, who's formerly the Dean of Wharton and who's currently the Dean of USC Marshall School of Business and a noted LinkedIn influencer thinker. And that's going to come on to Air Meet booth, and you can go there and access it between now and the next time that we are going to see you. And the next time that we are going to see you is at 5 p.m. Saturday next. Until next time, of course, go check out the videos, go over them, look at the summaries, and please look for and wait for the summaries that we will be sending you as well, along with the graphic record, the connected art that Santosh is putting together for us. And from my side, before I hand it over to Avantika, please have a conversation about this to someone else. Try explaining this to someone. You never know what a conversation can spawn. And when you explain it to someone, you know that you know the areas where you're going to go out and pick up more. And of course, spread the data, spread the idea, wear the mask. Avantika, for you, for closure and last words. Thank you.
I know we're at time, but thank you so much, everyone who's joined. And I'm sure one of the things that Vishy Anand said as well was language is probably the most important thing that we humans have. So use the language, communicate, talk to each other. And I'm pretty sure some of these ideas, especially that Kerala train story, I'm pretty sure if you share that on, you can't have a better icebreaker than that. But thank you so much for joining, everyone. And I look forward to seeing everyone on coming Saturday, which is the 22nd.
Thank you and have a nice evening ahead.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.